Welcome in to the Rockies Insider. I am your Rockies Insider, Patrick Lyons, bringing you the 26-man opening day roster for next Friday, March 28th against the Tampa Bay Rays. Who's on the roster and who isn't? You've seen the title of this episode, I'm sure, already, and you know Zac Veen has not been included on the 26-man roster for opening day. This is in the wake of the Nolan Jones trade, in which we thought, for all intents and purposes, that move had a lot to do with freeing up a spot for Zac Veen. However, he is one of a handful of players who were optioned to Triple-A or reassigned to minor league camp. The big move, of course, on Sunday was Zac Veen getting optioned to Triple-A Albuquerque. And I'll tell you what Bud Black had to say about what Zac Veen needs to do to make the next step, to finally come across the finish line and make his major league debut. The second biggest piece of news of the day, transaction-wise, was outfielder Nick Martini, the 34-year-old, soon to be 35-year-old in June. So this is his age 35 season. He has been added to the opening day roster. He's played great, similarly to Zac Veen, similarly to Sean Bouchard. But Nick Martini, the 34-year-old who, tip of the cap to Lewis from Blake Street Banner, Nolan Jones actually has more plate appearances in the major leagues than Nick Martini. Now, Nick Martini does have a year playing ball over in Korea, but nevertheless, Bud Black going with the veteran Nick Martini on his opening day roster. And there's a decent shot that Martini is going to end up starting in right field. Left field at Coors Field is a bit larger than right. Right field is all about playing the different textures, as Charlie Blackmon once described it, all the different textures in that auxiliary scoreboard. So it's a little bit smaller in right field. It's also a little bit higher. It's one of the reasons why it is a little bit higher, because it is a bit smaller. So left field is a bit more cavernous, and Jordan Beck is going to get the bulk of those assignments out in left field. Some of the other transactions from today, reliever Diego Castillo, who seemed like he was ticketed for the opening day roster, ultimately will not be. He was reassigned to minor league camp. We'll see if he ends up in Triple-A Albuquerque. Infielder, outfielder Owen Miller also reassigned to minor league camp, along with catcher Austin Nola. It remains to be seen if all of those guys are going to end up sticking around. With Austin Nola, you do have Braxton Fulford, in addition to Drew Romo down in Triple-A. So not sure if he'll be back or not. If he sees a ton of opportunity for him, I tend to think that could be the case. Castillo, we'll wait and see. Miller, we'll wait and see. And Aaron Schunk, also reassigned to minor league camp. More likely than not, I can see him sticking around for the Rockies. Already starting to see the chat get filled up with comments and questions. I will be taking those here live on YouTube. If you're listening to this on the podcast side, go and leave a comment and I can respond to you there. Even if you're listening to this on the podcast side a day or two later, come back over on YouTube and comment on the video. The other guy who was reassigned to minor league camp was Jake Woodford, who has gotten some starts. He's done a little long relief for the Rockies in spring training, but he has exercised his opt-out clause as he was not placed on the 40-man roster. So because of this, he has been released by the Rockies, so he is no longer around. Colorado now has 29 players remaining in Major League Camp with 0 non-roster invitees. And so you're probably saying, well, there's a 26-man roster on opening day, and there's 29 players remaining in camp. Who are the 3 that are in camp that aren't going to be on the opening day roster? And it's actually kind of obvious, though, again, a lot of this can be the logistics of Major League Baseball and the logistics of professional sports and how things are classified, because the 3 guys that are still considered in camp and will not be on the opening day roster are Austin Gomber, Tyro Estrada, and Jeff Criswell. All 3 of them will start the season on the IL. Estrada going to be out longer than Gomber, but certainly should be playing at some point this season. Jeff Criswell done for the year. He'll be on the 60-day IL as he does need to have Tommy John surgery. Lux in the chat. Patrick, bro, you told me last night The Nolan Jones trade was to have Veen play. What's the trade for now? I don't know. I'm a little bit dumbfounded. I will have to say that, because anytime you make a trade and anytime you make a transaction, there's a lot of moving pieces that go along with it. And now that the moving pieces have settled, the Rockies ultimately traded Nolan Jones, fourth place finisher in the National League Rookie of the Year award voting, less than 2 years ago in 2023. They've traded him for a utility infielder, outfielder in Tyler Freeman. I believe both are going to have the same amount of club control. So no one team is getting a little bit more of one player than the other. So this is just a straight up 1-for-1 deal. Now, are there things that the Rockies know about Nolan Jones's back that they don't particularly care for? And is the injuries that he has suffered to his back ultimately for the Rockies concern, because they have so many young outfielders that are just looming, just waiting for that opportunity in Triple-A, that maybe that was a deciding factor, that the injury that he has been playing through just a little bit, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. That was the straw that allowed you to decide that camel over there is not going to go for me anymore, so let's get rid of it. And this has been the Rockies' philosophy for a while, that, hey, these sort of things will sort themselves out. And that's true, because this has sorted itself out. The Rockies, in many ways can't have a guy on the IL and keep coming on and off repeatedly, especially when you're trying to build momentum for a lot of younger players in your outfield. On the other hand, you're not giving a lot of opportunities to those young outfielders right now. It's just Jordan Beck, and you saw Jordan Beck at the end of last year. In fact, all of the guys that came up late last year and the Rockies felt really good about in September, and it became this groundswell of, hey, let's let the kids play. Unfortunately, there are no more and no less kids on this roster than you saw at the end of last season. No place for Zac Veen on the opening day roster. No place for your top pitching prospect in Chase Dollander. And I think that's really hard to stomach, especially when you look around baseball and there's so many guys right now. I'm not even going to put out there those cool videos that go out of a manager with a small little camera in the corner of the room that the player can't see. And the manager says, hey, I just want you to know, hey, you've had a good spring. And, there's a lot of guys on this roster that have been battling for a spot. And some of them got a lot of big league experience. And we know you're going to have a good year. But we do have to tell you, curveball here, 180, you have, in fact, made the opening day roster. And that's just a wonderful video. It goes viral. It's great. I feel bad for Rockies fans right now. I want to give all of you a big hug right now, because you're not going to have that moment this year with Zac Veen or Chase Dollander. That's just not happening. So the Nolan Jones trade is just a 1-for-1 deal that unfortunately I can't really polish up that well. I understand that there's a logjam of outfielders, but I don't know how you come to this decision to not only get rid of a guy that, how many months ago was there a Nolan Jones bobblehead? Is this the quickest turnaround time for a player in Rockies history to have a bobblehead and then immediately get traded? It just seems like strange timing in a lot of different ways. So it's hard for me to make sense. It's definitely hard, Lux, for me to make sense of the trade. R in the comment, will Monfort ever sell the team? Probably not. Nolan Jones and Juan Brito for Tyler Freeman, pretty much. Well, it's more like Tyler Freeman for Juan Brito, because Jones is back where he ended up starting, and you did get 2 seasons out of him. But certainly there was a great meme going around of, Paul Rudd on Hot Ones and, hey, look at us. Look at us. Well, now it's Nolan Jones and Juan Brito saying that to one another. Like, hey, can you believe it? We're actually together. We were actually traded for each other at one point. Russ in the comments, you think the Rockies just did the trade because they don't believe in Jones? I think they saw a track record of Nolan's career of mostly inconsistent play besides 2023. Sure, there's some inconsistency, a lot of it coming as a minor leaguer. Certainly a lot of slow starts, and so you do have to be patient with that. But there are just countless numbers of minor league players who are inconsistent throughout their minor league careers that either A, never reached the majors, or B, when they did reach the majors, they never reached the heights to what Nolan Jones was able to accomplish in 2023. I said it a lot on Saturday Night Show. Go back and listen to that. You'll get a lot more in-depth detail than how I'll get into this now. But 20 home runs, 20 stolen bases, 19 outfield assists. No player in Rockies history had ever shown that much power and that much speed in the same season as a rookie. And Nolan Jones did that when he was finally given that opportunity to play. Don't forget, I think it was April 23rd through 25th, Nolan Jones got called up from Triple-A after performing well the first couple weeks of the season down in the Pacific Coast League, and then he just sat the bench and didn't even play. He got sent back down. He was super hot. They couldn't ignore him. They finally started to play him, and then he slowly started to pick up that momentum. So you do have to have some patience with these younger players. And so since he still is a young player that is going to be inconsistent, you have to deal with those growing pains. And you have a 6 consecutive season losing streak, right? 6 consecutive seasons under 500. This should have been and should be the time in which the Rockies show the most patience ever in franchise history, because this year is going to be a 7th consecutive losing season, something they have never experienced before. There's even a chance that this could be their 3rd consecutive 100 loss season. So right now, patience should be that game. I've said it all off season. Lose 110 games this year, but lose it with all of your best prospects at the major league level, figuring things out, getting playing time, so you can figure out who just was a little inconsistent as a younger player in the minors and who's actually going to be able to have a really good career. Because you can look and see moments in which Ezekiel Tovar struggled and Brenton Doyle struggled and Michael Toglia struggled. But when the keys were eventually turned over to them and they were told, this is your position, you are going to play, this is your job, they started to excel. And you've got players at virtually every single position around the diamond, in the rotation, and in the bullpen of young players that you could turn those keys over to see how well they do. And if you lose 110 games with them, that's okay, because you feel a little bit better about your future. But if you win 65 and lose 97, sure, you avoided 100 losses, but who did you win those 65 games with? Is it with anyone that's going to be around in the future? Is it going to be anyone of that kind of relevance? And if the answer is no, you have to exert a lot more patience. Rodriguez, I remember something when Chris Bryant debuted. Cubs decided to send KB for a couple weeks to the minors before he debuted. It was ultimately April 17th. Opening day was April 5th. Everyone was upset but the Cubs. And that's absolutely right. So that's called service time manipulation. This was also a player that was a National League Rookie of the Year award favorite. And the Rockies have a lot of really good prospects, but none of which are actually favorites. And, you know, I'll go back and say that, look at Brendan Rodgers. Brendan Rodgers never reached free agency on his own. He never attained 6 years of service time to become a free agent. So if you have a prospect that you really don't know what they are going to bring to the table, why do you want them around for that 7th season in which he might not even be a part of your team anyway? If you're going to let him go, if you're going to non-tender him, what was the point of even holding him back and not letting him run wild and run free back when he was a prospect and he could have made the opening day roster? So you shoot yourself in the foot and you lose all of that momentum with a decision in which you manipulated service time, like with Chris Bryant. That ended up working out pretty well for the Cubs. Of course, he still won the Rookie of the Year award. They went on to win the World Series the next year. But with the new rules in the CBA, the Cubs would have been punished. They wouldn't have received that compensation pick in the next year's draft. And Chris Bryant would have gotten a full year of service time. And so he would have become a free agent 1 year earlier. Those are the new rules that are in place. Taylor, I have a feeling they just want to platoon Bouchard, Martini, and preferred getting Veen more at bats until he's, quote, ready, which sucks. True. That's right. They'll have some kind of platoon, guys that have good at bats. I mean, look, Nick Martini is a good professional at bat. He's a patient hitter. You go back and look at his numbers, and I think the Rockies are hoping he's going to be more of the guy that you got to see in 29 games have a 137 OPS plus and a 912 OPS. But that was only in 29 games, and that was an injury-plagued season. Then in 2024, last year, he played 52 games, so still injury-plagued, and had only a 73 OPS plus, 641 OPS. So it's not as if Nick Martini is a world beater. He's going to contribute to this team. In fact, Buddy this morning, Sunday morning, did say, hey, Jake Cave, Nick Martini is going to fill that role of Jake Cave. And remember, Jake Cave was man of the people and everyone really liked him. That's going to be Nick Martini this year. And a tip of the cap too to Renee Deckert, who in her newsletter, it's called Rockies Pitch. Go check that out. Free subscription. I highly recommend it. Renee is one of the best writers about the Colorado Rockies that we have in and around Denver. But she said, Nick Martini signed as a non-roster invite. This reeks of a Jake Cave 2.0, and this is precisely what it is. Harry saying in the chat, for a team like the Rockies are going to lose 100-plus games, what does Martini give you for the future that Bouchard and Veen don't? Right there. Again, it's about preparing for the future. And I don't feel that this move prepares them for the future. Sean Bouchard's a little bit older himself, so he's still a guy that doesn't have a ton of service time, but he's very close to 30 years old, a lot more than you probably realized. So that prospect status still not there. And I'll also say this too, that I think in a vacuum and to a certain degree, you could make the case that Martini and Bouchard help the Rockies win more games in April. We'll just use April than Zac Veen. That being said, it's very myopic to only be thinking about April with your decisions on the opening day roster. You do have a long season ahead of you, no doubt about it. But this is a team that needs more than just worrying about the first month of the season. Jeff saying, my favorite part of this is the despair. I read it nice and upbeat. So I don't know if that's how you were thinking it sounded, Jeff, but I read it as my favorite part of this is the despair. Just R, just the letter R. Then pay out Chris Bryant. I said it Saturday night in the emergency pod. Go check that out. Before this season, before right now, I really had no issue with Chris Bryant staying on the roster, partially because there weren't a ton of guys that were ready for the opportunities at the major league level. So yeah, he is blocking a little flexibility, a little, but if he is your DH and he is not really going to be able to play the field very much, if at all, if he's not really going to be able to play on back-to-back days. Now, he did play on Friday and Saturday for the first time all spring, but it was just a total of 4 plate appearances. So not 2 full games yet. So that now leaves you with just a 3-player bench. And one of those players on your bench is going to be a catcher. So you have 2 guys, super utility players that need to cover all of the infield spots and all of the outfield spots. It doesn't give you a lot of flexibility with Chris Bryant still on the roster and still not showing that he really can contribute in a significant way to this roster. We're going to have to wait and see what ends up happening going forward. Nate in the chat, good to see you, buddy. October 19, go give him a follow. Great Rockies fan. Stinks no Veen to start the year, but what's your over-under on 80 games played by him this year for the Rockies? That's a good question. Does he spend more than half the season up on the Rockies? I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say that that's going to be the case. Another thing coming out of camp in Salt River Fields from some of the things that I've heard is that there was a little bit of an emphasis on the fact that, keep in mind, fans, the opening day roster is not the roster we're going to use for all 162 games of the season, for all 182 days of the regular season. So that says to me that they're going to try to have some of these younger guys work on some things down in Triple-A. Look, there's a ton of really talented players in Double-A, but nobody on the Double-A roster is ready for the majors just yet. They might be after a month, but they're going to get a little bit extra work. They're going to get additional playing time as well. And then we could see them a little bit more. Now, Nate, take this with a grain of salt, because back in 2023, I specifically created a question in the preseason of the predictions for the year. when is Zac Veen going to debut? And I had a date. I think it was even April 16th against the Diamondbacks at home. That's when you're gonna save that call up. And we're almost 2 years since, and he's yet to debut. So what do I know, right? But I'm gonna take the over on the 80 games played. That's a great question. Rhino, the guy that is dragging Clint Hurdle into the mud. Rhino, what are you doing there, bud? Right? Rhino saying, yeah, but they let Doyle play all year in the bigs and struggle. And the same with Tovar as a rookie. So why not do the same with Zac Veen? Can't argue with that. That is a great point. That is a great point. Now, Brenton, Doyle, and both Doyle and Tovar did provide major league defense immediately. So they were contributing to the Rockies roster despite some of the offensive struggles. That being said, they turned the keys over to those guys. Both of them won the Gold Glove Award last year, and both of them could be in line for an All-Star Game appearance in 2025. That's the kind of investment that you need to make in your young players. Not just drafting, not just trying to develop them and seeing them on top 100 lists or top 30 lists for your team. It's giving them that opportunity at the major league level to fail. All of them have already failed in the minors, just like all players fail in the minors. That's something that a lot of teams like to talk about, is this idea that we actually want them to experience some kind of failure in the minors so they know what that's like, so they can go through that. The first time they fail, we don't want it to be at the major league level. And so you could argue that's maybe some of the situation with Chase Dollander, is that, hey, you haven't really gotten your teeth kicked in yet because you were pretty dominant. You're really solid in high A Spokane and double A Hartford. Maybe you need to experience that. So when you do experience at the major league level, because you will experience that. Going back to Clint Hurdle, look, there's two types of players: those who have been humbled and those who will be humbled. You're going to be humbled in the majors, so you might as well feel that just a little bit down in the minors. But Rhino, I can't really argue with your logic here. If in the chat, if we have a player win Rookie of the Year, we get a comp pick, so why not let Veen play in the bigs? Now, there's different. I'm glad you're bringing this up. Again, this is part of the specifics that go on behind the scenes that, despite the fact that I've been talking about this a lot, I don't know how much weight this conversation really puts upon the opening day roster. I think it has some weight, and I'm sure these things are being discussed, and I would certainly love to err on the side of caution if I were the one making the decisions. I'm not, and that's okay. But you only get a compensation pick if a player is on the opening day roster and they are a top 100 prospect according to the MLB Pipeline top 100 prospects. So it has to be both of those things. And unfortunately, Zac Veen is not a top 100 prospect right now. So that would only be in play for Chase Dollander. In fact, if you started Chase Dollander on the opening day roster, he makes one start, and the plan is to send him back down to the minors. You option him, works on a couple of things, then comes back up and wins the Rookie of the Year award. You still get that compensation pick. Taylor pointing out that Nick Martini hit 2 home runs on opening day last year. True. I don't think you're making a big grand point, but what I will say to that is CJ Cron once hit 2 home runs on opening day in 2023, and he's not here anymore, and he's not a part of the future. Lux in the chat saying, I liked Cave as a bench bat. Playing 120 games was too much. And I know there's a lot of people over at Purple Row right now that when I say the name Harold Castro, they're pulling out their hair right now. So this has definitely been a trend that has not changed. And there are a lot of things that have changed in the Bill Schmidt era of him running the show as the general manager that you could look at and say, well, this has been a change for the Rockies. And as time has gone by, some of those changes are changes, but some of them I think are merely just exceptions to the rule. The Rockies are doing things the same way as they've been for a while, and the results are not changing. And I really worry that the results are not going to change again for 2025. Jeff in the chat, I was looking forward to seeing him in Kansas City in April. Now, see, that actually gets me right there. That does get me, Jeff. You're hyped up on a guy who's come through. He's delivered. He does his part. I think Patrick Saunders wrote about this. What else did Zac Veen need to do to show that he was ready for the opening day roster, that he was ready for the 2025 season, that he was a guy on the rise, a player that had momentum. Is he going to be able to keep that up? Does he have to keep that up? Is Yanquiel Fernandez now going to debut before Zac Veen, despite Veen being the one that had the great spring and did everything he needed to do? If Yanquiel Fernandez goes off and is April's player of the month in the Pacific Coast League, does that now mean Yanquiel Fernandez is the guy that comes up? And if he doesn't get promoted, there's going to be a lot of fans that are going to get upset at that as well. And they're still right to be upset at that, because maybe it should be both Veen and Yanquiel Fernandez up in the majors doing their thing. And yes, there is, and Taylor mentioned that too in the chat, that there's only so much playing time to go around. And that is part of the problem that the Rockies have right now with all of these prospects that are ready and knocking on the door, is balancing all that playing time. But there is a way that you can get that done. There is a DH spot now in the National League. So you can have 4 really good outfielders play at the same time. You can't have 4 really good outfielders play at the same time and Chris Bryant. But you can have 4 really good young outfielders at the same time playing. 3 in left, center, and right, and 1 at DH. Taylor saying Blaylock will just be the long reliever to start the season due to schedule flexibility, and then he'll slide into that 5th rotation slot. I don't think so. I don't think that really works out logistically because, and I've talked about this already, what if on the day in which you need him to be your number 5 starter, he's needed the day prior, right? Hey, we've got him all set up. He's going to pitch in a couple days. He's going to start. Who's your long reliever tonight? And if you have to blow through a couple guys in the bullpen, what if you need those guys on the next night? So you're kind of leaving yourself a little bit shorthanded. And I think the team would really like for Blaylock to continue to serve in that long reliever role. And if he's going to be in that long reliever role, then you just happen to need another starting pitcher. It's also become very apparent that Austin Gomber very likely will make the start on April 8th, the first day that he is eligible to come off the IL. So if you got tickets for that game, you should be able to see Austin Gomber's debut this season. Rhino, I see your comment, but I'm not going to click on it. Thank you. Appreciate that. Put some respect on CJ Cron's name. Dude, since 2019, only one player for the Colorado Rockies has hit 30 home runs in a season. Christopher John Crone. So, look, dude raked. He delivered. He fell short of 100 RBI. We're still waiting. Since 2019, Nolan Arenado, the last player with 100 RBI on the Colorado Rockies. Strange for a team that plays in a ballpark that scores an abundance of runs. Has not had someone drive in 100 since 2019. Very strange. Now, let's re-examine some of the Nolan Jones trade. Keep leaving those comments, those questions in the chat over on YouTube. But it really seemed, and as it was pointed out, it seemed from Colorado's perspective, they were giving up Nolan Jones and not giving a utility roster spot to either Owen Miller or Aaron Schunk in this trade. They were getting Tyler Freeman as the utility player and clearing a space for Zac Veen. So you look and say, okay, at the end of the day for the Rockies, the Nolan Jones trade means you're trading Jones and a lesser utility infielder. Again, a good infielder, but one that you might not have as much confidence in, and the Rockies don't in those guys. So Jones and a utility infielder. And after the trade, you've got Zac Veen starting in left and Tyler Freeman, who can start in center field, which allows you to give Doyle those days off and put him as the DH, keep him in the lineup, but get him off his feet because Tyler Freeman can play center field. And Jordan Beck can play center field. So you've got your 4th outfielder situation pretty well sorted out because you have enough depth in center field. Instead, the space they clear for Nolan Jones created a roster spot, not for Zac Veen, 23-year-old Zac Veen, but soon-to-be 35-year-old Nick Martini. Sam Hilliard, who was long thought to be the 4th outfielder on the roster because of his ability to play all 3 outfield positions and play in center field. He has a roster spot, but Zac Veen does not. Now, why Sam Hilliard? Why is Sam Hilliard going to be on this opening day roster? He can play center field. He does have speed off the bench, and he's got a little bit of pop. Still the only guy that I've ever seen hit a ball so high that it bounced off the warning track and went over the Bridich barrier. That's how high he hit it in the air. That being said, all of those things, all of those qualities, I think Zac Veen can fit in. Maybe he can't play center field as well as Hilliard. Maybe he doesn't have as much pop as Hilliard, but he's got just as much speed. And he's going to be a part of your future. Sam Hilliard, his slash line this spring, 125, 208 on base percentage, and a 271 slugging percentage. Not good. But is he a veteran? Yeah. But can Zac Veen win you more games than someone like a Sam Hilliard? I think so. Is Zac Veen going to win you more games in 2026, 2027, 2028, and 2029? Absolutely. And does Zac Veen have the momentum coming off a great spring? Yes. So why not Zac Veen? One of the things the organization said was Veen needs to cut down on his strikeouts. His strikeout numbers were not up a lot from what he had produced in the past. It was at about 29%. He's averaged about 24, 25 throughout the minors. But you know who did have a 50% strikeout rate? Sam Hilliard. Half of his at-bats ended in strike 3. Jordan Beck also struck out more than Zac Veen at 33%. So the reason the Rockies are giving for why Zac Veen isn't on this roster doesn't really line up. Unfortunately, it does not line up. The issue, I think, for a lot of fans with this deal is that you have a logjam of young outfielders, and now you've jammed it up even further with a veteran player like a Nick Martini. Instead of having an outfield of 3 players aged 23 to 26 with any combination of Nolan Jones, Brenton Doyle, Jordan Beck, Zac Veen, take any 3 of those 4 guys. Instead of having that, it's hard, I think, for a lot of fans to stomach that in the wake of the Jones trade, who's 26, you're going to have some older players that are going to be out there a lot more regularly. Will that happen for much of the first half and the duration of the season? Time will tell. But it's not the exciting start I think a lot of fans really wanted and a lot of fans really needed to have on top of all of that. One of the other elements to this too, as I said, with the strikeouts is Colorado wants Veen to go back, work on making a little bit more contact, cutting down on his strikeout rate. And Nick Martini does that really well, 13.3% strikeout percentage, Beck 33.8. So he's striking out more than Zac Veen. It's got more power, doesn't have as much speed, a little more flexibility to play center field than Veen. But really, those two are very similar. And I think you could also make the case Zac Veen has actually done more to earn a spot on the roster than a Jordan Beck. At the end of the day, I think a lot of people want both of them on the opening day roster and starting on that opening day roster. So what is the opening day roster? It's set. It's final. As I said, 29 guys in camp, 3 on the IL. So we know who's on the opening day roster. We know. We don't know who's starting yet exactly. But here is the 2025 opening day roster for the Colorado Rockies for March 28th against the Tampa Bay Rays. Your 2 catchers are going to be Jacob Stallings and Hunter Goodman. At first base, Michael Toglia. At second base and utility infield outfield, you got Kyle Farmer and Tyler Freeman. At third base, Ryan McMahon. Shortstop is Ezekiel Tovar. In the outfield, it's going to be Brenton Doyle in center. I think Jordan Beck's your left fielder, Nick Martini in right, with a bench of Sean Bouchard and Sam Hilliard in your outfield. Your starting pitchers, only 4 with Comber on the IL. It's Kyle Freeland, Ryan Feltner, Herman Marquez, and Antonio Senzatella. Your high leverage relievers are going to be Tyler Kinley, Seth Halverson, Victor Vodnik. You also have Angel Chivigi, Jake Bird, and the 2 left-handers, Scott Alexander and Luis Peralta. And low leverage long relievers are going to be Jimmy Herget and Bradley Blaylock. That's who the Rockies are going to run out there in Tampa in less than a week. Also thinking that Tyler Kinley may open the season now as the closer. That very well could be the shot there. And we will not be getting Shane McClanahan, unfortunately, on opening day for the Tampa Bay Rays. Chase Dolander's good buddy. That's not happening. The triceps injury, again, is probably the best case scenario you could get when a guy comes off the mound holding onto his elbow. That was an awful scene on Saturday. In fact, Kyle Freeland was told about it, saw some video, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, that happened to him," and he was, he was a little distraught and really saddened to hear that the guy he was going to do battle with next Friday is not going to be able to be there. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with Shane McClanahan. We'll see what the Rays end up doing with their rotation on top of that as well. And yes, Lux, I missed this because I did this on social media at Patrick D. Lyons, at Patrick D. Lyons MLB. I did the entire roster, went through every position, but I forgot DH is kind of a position. It's a role, but it's a position. And I totally neglected to mention him multiple times. So now I got it. You saved me here, Lux. Appreciate that. Yes, and Chris Bryant also on that 26-man roster. Sunday's notes from the game. Chase Dollander, I wouldn't be surprised if he was a little deflated about getting demoted just a couple of days ago in his final spring start. 3 1/3 innings pitched against the Brewers, 6 hits, 6 runs, 5 were earned, 1 walk, 6 strikeouts. Monday and Tuesday, you're going to have Ryan Feltner for the final start in Arizona. Herman Marquez gets the start in Fort Myers, Florida on Tuesday. Monday's game is going to be on Rockies TV, so you can watch that. I think the rotation is probably going to be Freeland, Feltner, Marquez, and Senzatella. And if that holds up, I think that means Marquez is going to start the home opener. Yes, that would mean Marquez starts the home opener, but I'm not convinced that is going to be the order of the rotation. I think Antonio Senzatella could possibly slide up to the number 2 role. And if that does happen, Ryan Feltner becomes your home opener starter on April 4th. Now, Senza last pitched on March 21st, and Marquez has been starting before him most of the time. So Marquez is going to go on Tuesday. Marquez, his last start was March 20th. So they've been going back to back, but I could see that Buddy would like to maybe separate those two guys because of those injury concerns that they've had in the past, and that, you might have to be a little bit precautionary with them, taking them out of a game early if the pitch count gets a little too high in game. So you may have to protect them just a little bit. And if you're going to use your long reliever on one day to protect one of these guys who've just come back from Tommy John surgery, you're not necessarily going to be able to do that the next day without a couple roster moves, some shakeup in that bullpen, right? So maybe you want to separate them. So that's what I'm thinking. Maybe Senza ends up going game 2. If not, that rotation of Freeland, Feltner, Marquez, and Senzatella probably won't have to last very long, because Gomber should be back April 8th, the first day he's off the IL, and then Gomber can then split those guys up. So that wouldn't even last very long to begin with. So that's those are the tea leaves that I'm reading here for the Colorado Rockies for next Friday's opening day. And if you're a CSU Ram fan out there, I'm sorry. Thanks for joining me, and maybe you can actually get some answers to your disappointment in one sector of the sporting world. You're not going to get one after that buzzer beater against Maryland. That really, really sucks. But what doesn't suck is the interaction and fun over on social media. Even if your comments are a little frustrated, you can leave those comments underneath any posts that I have. I'm good with that. I don't take those kind of things personally. I'm not gonna bite back at you. If you're upset, you're upset. Be upset. You actually have all of the right in the world to do that. So at Patrick D. Lyons, at Patrick D. Lyons MLB, and at Rockies Insider TikTok, check out the Rockies Insider newsletter dropping early this week, talking about that opening day roster and some of these decisions that have been made for the future of the franchise. So Justin, jumping in the last minute, you're getting that high. What's going on, bud? So I appreciate everybody in the chat once again on back-to-back nights. This one was an emergency podcast, but this one definitely felt close to it after the news that Zac Veen, even in the wake of the Nolan Jones trade, was still going to be kept off this opening day roster. You needed a place, you needed a sounding board. This is it. Rockies Insider will always be that sounding board for you. So I appreciate you dropping by, giving me this momentum to get through another show. But as I like to say, momentum, well, It's only as good as your next show. So, of course, I'll talk to you then.